Hi everyone, my name is Fionna Fahey, my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm from the Interdisciplinary Studies Department in Liberal Arts at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is located in the homelands of the Yakitutu Yaktilhini Northern Chumash tribe. Today I'm going to be talking about my research, remembering legacies of sex worker history in San Luis Obispo, making famous, transforming stories of ill fame. Throughout my presentation, I will be using sex work as defined as a consensual transaction between adults where the act of selling or buying sexual services is not a violation of human rights, which is commonly referred to as the oldest profession. This differs from sex trafficking, where sex trafficking usually revolves around coercion or other threats of violence, etc. In the larger context of sex work, in 2018, the Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act, SESTA, and the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, FOSTA, were passed and were responsible for the removal of online platforms such as Backpage and Craigslist Personals. Because of these laws, many sex workers and other advocates have spoken out as they have felt more vulnerable to violence and criminalization. We've also seen a heightened experience of violence to sex workers, and stories like Laylene Polanco has surfaced, who was a Black trans woman who died while incarcerated for sex work. In a 2019 report done by two sex workers' rights organizations, 99% of online respondents reported that they do not feel safer since the passing of SESTA and FOSTA, and 36% of online respondents reported facing increased violence after the passage of these two laws. So why San Luis Obispo? Before starting this project, I began to hear rumors of historical brothels in San Luis Obispo, and to be honest, I was surprised. The city doesn't automatically have a sex appeal. Our residents are nearly all white, and we come from and have a high median income of over $75,000. Our closest strip club is also in the next county south, and we have a unique location as we are right in between Los Angeles and San Francisco. This ultimately led me to do a case study of sex work in San Luis Obispo from the late 1880s to the early 1900s. And so here you can see the guiding questions for my whole project, but for the purposes of this presentation, I will just be using this key question. What are the experiences and repercussions of sex workers' erasure? In order to analyze this question, I took a look at key literature and analyze these key themes: history, silence, and reclamation, voice and gathering and reimagining, and then tensions in the disciplines. When I came across tensions, I kept coming back to quotes like this: sex workers are persons who are worthy of freedom, respect, and love, from Indigenous and sex worker activists Naomi Sayers and Sarah Hunt. This presentation focuses on history, silence, and reclamation, and some key theorizers in this theme from the literature are Indigenous feminists Linda Tuahi Smith and Dion Millen, and Black feminist theorizer Cynthia Dillard, who coined remembering as a way to build collective resistance to history's loss to colonial violence. And so my problem statement is listed here. Due to the current legislation that continues to silence and criminalize sex workers, it is predicted that the results from these findings will give meanings to larger structures that perpetuate this violence and silencing. In order to really understand this, I did archival research in Cal Poly's digital archive, special collections, and in-person archive of newspapers and things like jail registries, etc. I used keywords such as ill fame, brothel keepers, red light, women, vagrancy, insanity, and vice. I then did a biographical case study of Nancy Emmeline Call, which ultimately led me to do a map analysis of Sanborn fire insurance maps from 1880 to 1909. And so here's my biographical case study. This is Nancy Emmeline Call, who was born in 1840 to 1905. This is basically all the information that we get from her online memorial, and you can see that she's remembered as a mother on her gravestone. Whereas from other sources, and in reality, I know that Call erected a series of female boarding houses during her life, and in the downtown district of San Luis Obispo. She was also arrested twice for knowingly providing space for sex work. And I posit in my research, what if we remembered her for all of her intricate identities rather than just as a mother? And so, based off my findings, I created this timeline. In 1840, Nancy Emmeline Call was born, and during her life, she built a series of female boarding houses, which were also code for brothel. In the 1880 print of the Sanborn Maps, 8 female boarding houses were recorded. But in 1909, they were revised to remove any recorded female boarding houses. In 1910, the White Slave Traffic or Mann Act was passed, which criminalized the transport of women for immoral purposes with an emphasis on sex work. And this was also during the progressive or anti-vice movement. In 1919, a report on an anti-vice crusade mentioned that there were still 10 houses of ill fame near downtown. So, we know that there are still houses where sex work is happening, even while there's a huge political movement to close down brothels throughout San Luis Obispo and the rest of the United States. And so on the left, you see the 1880 Sanborn maps. And as indicated by the pink highlight and the red rectangle, we can see that there are about eight houses recorded as female boarding houses on this map. And then on the right, we can see the 1909 version of the Sanborn maps where at the same intersection, even though it's formatted a little bit differently, there are no female boarding houses recorded. From the San Luis Obispo Daily Telegram on June 2nd in 1919, we see more discourse about the anti-vice crusade. The article goes on to say, "We will stay in this fight in San Luis Obispo until the last padlock is placed on the last house of ill fame in San Luis Obispo." Later, it goes on to say, "In your city, I found 10 houses of ill fame." So, again, we know that this movement is rapidly moving to close down brothels, but they're still present. This political movement was fueled by a collective unsettledness, also known as the White Slave Panic, which was a racialized and sexualized phenomena that was understood as a force pushing white women into sex work. And this white slave panic has now made its way into anti-sex trafficking narratives. From that same article, we can see this type of narrative. Our fight is not against these women, for we want to help them. We now have state rehabilitation that is educational, vocational, and morally helpful. On the right, we have a 2019 narrative from Shared Hope International, which is a prominent anti-sex trafficking organization, which says, "Society may call it prostitution, but federal laws call it sex trafficking. Victims need help, not judgment or punishment." These types of narratives reduce the intricate lives of sex workers just to a sole experience of victimhood, and can be harmful if the only discourse around sex workers are whether they should be criminalized or if they should be morally helped. And so, for my conclusions, the perpetuation of stigma and harmful narratives parallel each other even 100 years later. We also see that when we use a framework such as a remembering framework that focuses on sex workers' resiliency, we can actually understand how sex workers have been combating this fight they've been combating this fight for years and years and years. I also see a need for further research where I'd like to get oral histories from sex workers and get their perspective on this experience. There are also critical ramifications of this type of silencing, violence, and institutional violence, and they're often fatal for sex workers. This requires a great deal of advocacy towards sex workers' rights, and we all can be a part of it. Thank you.